So, why do we do marketing? The reason we market in dentistry is that some people just don't return. They don't come back. You didn't connect with them, and they didn't connect with you. That's the reason they don't come back. And not everyone is the same. That's why we have to invest in marketing. And we all look at that investment in a slightly different way. If we look at these 4 quadrants, where would you put marketing? Where does marketing belong? Right there. Do you know why? Because everything you do that touches the life of a person is marketing. You can't think of this as something or a system that you simply delegate or a skill you master. It is everything. Everything. And we're talking about reputation management. It is much bigger than simply your reviews. You have a reputation. You already have one. The issue is how many people know about your reputation. It's not just reviews. It's just that reviews are the most obvious. Even though your reputation is much bigger, your reviews are now the most obvious. And so those tend to be, they tend to be a focal that's out of proportion with what you really, what's real. The percentage of consumers now who use Google for reviews, look at statistically, healthcare, including dentistry, is way ahead of the rest. That was not always the case. Another interesting statistics is that Google is way ahead of the other technologies for what we use to rely on reviews. So that's why we consider, and have to at this point, we consider Google the 800-pound gorilla. But not all reviews are treated equal by Google. I don't know if you know this, but there's several categories of when someone leaves a Google review. If they simply give you 5 stars, as grateful as you may be for that, it doesn't do anything. It's like Google doesn't even hardly recognize it, sadly, but true. If they add a sentence or a paragraph, now it's legit. Now they will actually consider that a review. That's changed as well. But now what Google wants is for you to create data that their users can rely on to make choices. And a simple 5 stars, as wonderful as that once was, isn't enough anymore. In addition, if you add a photo to the paragraph, a slide or whatever that you did, maybe it's a picture of your office or something, that is like times 10 in value for a Google review. Now, knowing that, I just saw an office just recently that created a wall. They take a picture of the patient at the wall that has their practice name and all of that, and they give it to the patient, and the patient can use that to load up into their review. That's kind of ingenious, really. They're serious about marketing. It's kind of facilitating the kind of review that you want. On this coast, on the East Coast, Yelp is not a big deal, but on the West Coast, it's significant. But Google and health grades, this is where they decide, and the conversion is heavy here. They may have looked at your website, but it's about the reviews that will ultimately determine whether they're going to make the call. It wasn't always like that. That's a major shift in marketing in this industry, and it can really work in your favor. Your goal should be to convert every compliment into an invitation. Notice I did not say review, because you can't control that. See the difference in control? What I can control is that I can invite everyone that gives me a compliment, I can invite them to leave a review and tell them why. The why part. Remember the why? We'll get back to that too. That I can control. So if someone was to say, I really love coming here. Doctor, I'm so glad I found you. Sally, I love hearing that. When patients tell us that, it just makes my day. I would love for my team to hear that as well, because they get juiced and jazzed over these comments like I do. Would you be willing to leave a review so I could share it with them? And the patient will always say, whether they do it or not, it's a different story. But since you can't control that, what you can control is convert every compliment into an invitation to send a review. Because what you're really doing is you're also converting that into a bit of a compliment to them, right? You're building the relationship. And that's a much different ask than when you have a policy to check out patients and say, and you can tell the front desk has been asked to ask for reviews, and it's canned, it's part of their script, and it's like, yeah. Now, we can also talk about how you might use technology to help you with this. Don't even think about doing that with any of the others, but with Google, you can leverage technology that will automatically send invitations to leave a review. The fear is that, man, if I send that to everybody, then I'm going to lose my 4.9 or my 5.0 rating. That's the fear. The statistics are, it would be better to have more reviews at 4.8 than fewer reviews at 5.0 as far as Google's concerned, because it makes you real. And frankly, you could learn from maybe a bad review or two, but you don't need to be afraid of those. I'm getting ahead of myself, but you don't need to be afraid of those because it makes you real as well, and I'll tell you why. But my point is, if you convert every compliment into an invitation to leave a review, it's a natural way to control the people that are going to leave you a positive review. If you use technology to drive that, and many do, the way you can control that as well is maybe just shutting off the automatic review rather than cherry picking. You just shut it off for someone you know is going to give you a bad review because, well, it didn't work. You're just expecting a bad review. So to shut it off and not send them one is perfectly acceptable in this Google world of ours. But to have it automatic for most of the time is what's going to drive the most reviews for you. And most people don't realize that you may be using that technology, so it still works in their mind. Let's talk about negative reviews. Negative reviews are not the worst thing that ever happened to you. And I know there's some crazies out there. And I know, I bet if I ask for a show of hands, none of you have escaped the negative reviews. And the days of trying to figure out how to get that thing off are gone. They're gone. Because we, as consumers, are also now more skilled at looking through that lens. And when we see a negative comment, we can look at how it was responded to, what the business said in response, and we can make a decision for ourselves if that's a Looney Tune or if that was really something that is legitimate that we should consider. Especially when I weigh that with all of the other comments that are probably more positive, right? But boy, when you get a negative review and you wait a month or two to respond, that sends a message too. That's dangerous. So what's really important now is to recognize that statistically we are all getting very good at reading the responses that businesses leave all of their reviews. It's not just about the review anymore. We've gone deeper. We are reading how the business responded. And that, 89% are reading the responses. That can't be ignored. And here is an example of what that negative review might look like. If I was to write it, not being redundant, this is what I might say. If I'm a consumer, a potential customer, a potential patient, and I read that, what does that tell me? What's the message? It's professional. You did not step in the let's get pissy game. You can't afford to do that, especially with HIPAA. You stay above the board. Keep it professional. It's okay. Don't overreact. Here's an example of a response to a positive review. Notice how short it is. It could even be shorter. And it used to be, as little as a year ago, it used to be that we focused on teaching that the response should include as many keywords as possible for SEO purposes. In other words, maybe you put excellence in dentistry, or you put something in there, you put keywords that you want Google to recognize, because that's a way for you to help maximize your SEO. That's no longer true. That has dropped by 250% in importance. And now it's a matter of being focused on writing a response that will be favorable to the prospective patients that are reading those responses. That's far more important. And you can't respond to all of them the same. And I know that's a bit tedious. You need to change it up a little. What message does it send if it's redundant? It's not a message you want to send. We don't need to go there. You should have Google Alerts set up. If you don't, it's not going to alert you when you get a review. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that every review you get, you're the first one to know. You shouldn't be the last. Because if you don't respond to something for weeks or months, that sends a message as well. You have to prove yourself as responsive, and Google Alerts will help you do that. Simple to do, and you can find that on YouTube. We get this question a lot. What's the impact on SEO when we're talking about this balance between volume and velocity? Here's a great Google update for you. Used to be the total volume of reviews is what mattered. But Google started to realize that, how is that fair? Not that they've ever really been interested in making it fair, but for someone who's been practicing for 20 years versus someone who's practicing 2 or 2 months, how is that really fair if we're going to judge the review quality by the total volume? So they've actually changed it. Now they're far more focused on the consistency and the velocity, the frequency of the reviews that are coming in. Which means if you're cherry picking, man, that's a lot to manage. That's one reason you should look at automating this and making that a lot easier, because you don't want to go months without a review. And if you do, it actually shows that you're really cherry picking. You need for SEO value, you need to have a regular flow of reviews, including those that you convert, those compliments you convert to invitations to review. And how many reviews should you have? Well, again, with this change with Google, they're even taking off reviews that are more than a couple years old. They may still list them, but they're not treating it with any value from an SEO standpoint. But if a practice has been, my gosh, for any more than 2-3 years, on average, you ought to have at least, by then, if you're doing your job from a marketing standpoint, practice that's been in practice for 2-3 years ought to already have at least 75 to 100 reviews. That's not unrealistic. But you can't survive with 5 or 6. You just won't compare. It's not possible. So let's talk about the websites themselves and various growth strategies from a technological standpoint. What percentage of the new patients you schedule, do you think visit your website before they actually walk through that door? A lot, more than ever before. That's significant, because that's now putting our websites in a different category than we've ever put them before. I was in the trenches when the internet phase hit the street. And I got question after question. Do I need a website? How much should I spend on building a website? If I build a website, will they come? Well, we proved overnight that they didn't. Because when we first started building websites back in the day, not me as in my clients, hiring people to build websites, we didn't understand anything about SEO. Now it's a completely different story, but the website itself, man, we've come a long way. A long way. I approach marketing from a very holistic approach. Instead of fragmenting this and that, it should all be centered around your website. It should be the repository. It should be the foundation of your entire marketing efforts. It is of really the most significance if it's built correctly, and we'll get there in a minute. And then surrounding that is the SEO and local search, followed by online reviews and videos and social media and any PPC or pay-per-click paid ads you may choose to do. That may or may not be something that you need or do, but it has its purpose and its place, and I want to explain that. But all of those should feed into your website. They should not be fragmented, especially for purposes with Google. A website is built for two audiences. First one is the people you want to show your website to, prospective patients. It's built for people. That's important. But just as important is the side no one ever sees, including yourself, which is the back-end code. And it has to be built in a way that Google likes what they see. Google has its own language and it has its own expectations, and it has to be built with code that they will recognize. Otherwise, all you have is the equivalent of a billboard in the middle of the desert with no highway even close. If it's not been built with proper CEO, if it's not been optimized. Let's talk about the purpose. The purpose of a website is to drive traffic and to convert traffic. Those are the sole reasons why you're talking about digital marketing as a whole. And this includes your website, and that involves all of your calls to action. If you're not converting traffic, even though you may be getting a lot of traffic, it's still not worth it. It's not worth paying for. Here are the key features of a website. There's a lot of them. If we're looking at the key features from the standpoint of the value of the people that will be looking at it. Here's an example of a website that I love to use as an example because there's so much that's right about it. Incorporating the various aspects we've already talked about. Here's an example of it. I love the way the colors of the website complement the colors used in the office. You see how complementary that is? I love the fact that there's a way right there to request an appointment, and there's multiple contact opportunities. It's not just one place. And when you scroll down, as I show the next slide, there's 4 or 5, it's basically you scrolling down or going to different pages. But watch what happens. Look at that top toolbar. It doesn't go away. It should stay where it is. It should be a stationary or revolving toolbar so that when they see something they like, they don't have to find and scroll back to how am I going to call them? I want to make it, you want it to be there all the time. I love how they explain those pages. Those are great pages, great categories. The types of dentistry that they do are profiled. I love the picture of the practice. Granted, not every practice looks like that. I think this is Bozeman, Montana. They get all the luck, right? But I love the fact that they've shared some of their why. That's appealing to patients, especially here. They're showing you who they are. Meet the doctor, meet the team, the services they offer, and I get this question all the time. But if I put reviews on my website, are they really even believable? Unless they went to Google to read them? Yeah, they do. They actually are. Especially if you link to Google from this very page. So instead of making them do extra work, your website should contain automatically the latest reviews that you have and allow them to click on finding more. That's a great website. But the purpose for the back-end website is completely different. Did you know that Google indexes, or in layman's terms, takes a digital snapshot of your website every 4 to 6 weeks? And you know what they do with that? They compare it to the next one they do 4 to 6 weeks from now. Why? They want to know if you're stagnant or if you're adding content. Once a month, you should be doing something. But if you are in any way involved with the social media side, that's considered content. So we're not talking about building a page with a new service that's like huge. We're talking about changing out a photo of your staff or adding a picture of maybe a new operatory that you painted or something. But graphics are important. And graphics are beautiful because graphics are in fact unique. Most people aren't going to steal your graphics, especially if it's of your practice. So that's already unique content. So you don't have to overkill. You just need to be on it instead of ignoring it for years. This is a technology we use to learn ourselves about what's important to a website, in learning the patient journey that they take when they look at a website. I mean, you're going to design a website, you need to know how a patient thinks. And so we used a technology called heat mapping. You know what that is? That's a way to track multiple people going to a website and look at where their cursor's going. And this is what we learned. You see that red spot? You know where that was? Meet the doctor. About us. That was a huge revelation. And the reason it's the reason it's significant is this. When you build a website and your web vendor asks you for your bio, you give them the very bio that you would give to maybe your school that shows all of your credentials, and yeah, that's all significant. But you're missing a great opportunity. The reason patients go to that page first is they are wanting to know who you are. They're attempting to bond with you. They're not looking for whether or not you graduated from dental school. They are assuming that. Should those be there? Yes, but it should be more than that. The dentists that really shine in this area, for whatever reason, are pediatric dentists. They're able to describe themselves in a way like they're talking to a child that they're used to working on, and it resonates with the parents. They do really well at describing themselves and what their why is, and that takes us back to that why. But now, in addition to the search engines and prospective patients, there's a third audience that we now have to carefully consider in the market that we're in. Who do you think that audience is? That third audience is that staff member you're trying to recruit. If that staff member is a northbounder, they go to your website and it's antiquated, you've not updated it, it doesn't look current, it doesn't allow them to learn what they want to learn about what it's going to be like working in your practice, if it's not a positive reflection on you when other websites look far more appealing, they're really harder to attract. We've never had to consider building websites to attract team members. Today we do, because times have changed. So this takes us to that why. Your website is essentially your autobiography, how you are projecting yourself to the world and allowing people to bond with you with their heart versus their head. We write bios in dentistry for people for their head, instead of including why you do what you do. Why did you go into dentistry? Why do you love dentistry so much? What is it about dentistry that floats your boat? We're not spending enough time on that in our bios. You go back and read your bio and see if you're on course, if it has enough why, if it's appealing to someone that's searching for someone that they can. And remember, that was the now see, that makes more sense. Because a new patient is going to buy you, not because of what you do, but because of why you do it. Now that's even more applicable. As far as SEO, I don't want to go too deep here because it's highly technical, and frankly, I'm not an expert. There are people in my company that are, and they do a really good job of this. They bore me to tears, but they do a really good job. But remember this page, right, with regard to the code? This has more to do with your SEO than probably anything else that you could do. Because Google is looking for a specific language and they're looking for certain keys to determine whether or not you outrank someone else that's also a dentist in your community, how that back end is built requires some real skill. And one thing that we often see is what we refer to as schema. Schema is a place in your website that dictates all of your professional information, your contact information. We call it NAP, name, address, phone number. And they should be consistent with all of the other directories that are out there talking about you, that are trying to send patients to you. And if it's not consistent, then that's a major flaw. But Google needs to see this. And you would be surprised how many people come to us and we look at their website and it's not even been optimized. They've completely left out that code because they knew that when they were selling you a website that you were more focused on that people side than the back end side. All of you are familiar with Google Professional Profile, right? Business Profile. It used to be called Google My Business. It's on Maps. So when you search for a restaurant, and you get on Maps, and you pull this up, that's called your Google Business Profile. They changed the name. If your website is your autobiography, Google My Business, or now Google Business Profile, is your electronic business card. And few are maximizing or optimizing that like they should. Let me give you an example. This doctor was actually one of my last consulting clients, and I told him, I will work with you. He was 12 years experience setting up a new office, we call him de novo, a new office in an area that he was going to invest in the equipment, rent and lease the space, but not buy any practice, just start from scratch. That's very popular now because of debt and because marketing can actually make that happen. So with 12 years experience, he decided to pull the trigger on that strategy, and I said, I will not work with you unless you use the marketing company that I know and can trust, otherwise you need to find someone else. So he did. And this is how this page is optimized. It not only has all the information, you notice the link to the Google reviews. By this time, he was less than 2 years in and he had 188 reviews. It has all the services he provides as well as the office hours, and it pulls in the reviews as well. All of that, that's like 3 pages. This was a scroll down. And most people don't maximize what's absolutely free, and that's your Google Business Profile. It's free. You're just not feeding it. And those that are maximized, because it's such a priority for Google, they rank higher than those who have not maximized or their page. Everyone knows that Google is number one. We've been talking about that now. Who can tell me who number two? As a search engine, who's the number two search engine next to Google? No takers? Bing? What? Facebook? Anyone else? Would you believe it's YouTube? YouTube is a search engine. Why is that relevant? So what? It's because, yes, Google acquired YouTube in '06 for pennies compared to what it's worth now. But when that happened, that signaled a major shift in the internet market as a whole, because we're no longer just looking at what we need to read or research. We're looking at how we use the internet as a whole. And video on your website, on any website, will always outrank websites that do not have video. Think about unique content. What's more unique than a video? That's the most unique content you can have. And there's so many ways that you can use video. Let me tell you the latest trends. Other than the proof, according to Bright Local, which is a very reputable research company, YouTube is now 35% using that to find local businesses. Local news is the only competitor, and you're not going to go there as a dentist. Yeah, you can do Instagram. Don't get me started on TikTok, and everything else is fairly irrelevant. YouTube is a search engine, and we've been really slow to catch on to that. The way we use video to maximize your conversion, see that? Videos will increase your website conversion by 46%. And it's not just, there's not just one place you can use it. It's great for overview videos. Have you ever seen, you know what I mean by an overview video? When you pull up a website, it's B-roll, or in other words, it's like a tour through your office with, no sound per se. You're just seeing smiling faces and people checking people out, or maybe a patient saying hi to the doctor and the doctor smiling, or whatever it is. That's an overview video that gives a patient an opportunity to actually have a tour of your office before they ever walk in the door. So you can enfold them into this experience that you want for them. And they're not that expensive. But if you have a website that comes up now that's just static, it has less appeal than something that already has action related to your video, to your practice, and it's inviting them into that experience. Doctor bios are great, but some doctors don't feel like they're, interview material. You can have somebody help you through that. But a doctor that's just being honest on camera about telling a patient what he tells a patient, or what you tell a patient all the time about your practice. They can hear your why, not just read about it. Those are powerful. Testimonial videos are powerful. They can be facilitated. Someone talking about your practice that's loaded into YouTube on your own YouTube channel that's connected to your website. That's an imperative. The services that you offer, as well as education, should also be videos, but they don't have to be unique videos as far as unique, as in you don't have to reinvent the engine for like using something like Dear Doctor videos to explain procedures. You can use them, and that's still considered unique content to Google. And it's also very, very productive from an SEO standpoint. Social media should not be the place that you're trying to attract new patients from a marketing standpoint. It's just that you have to think of social media, in my opinion, as the place that your patients hang out and you probably ought to have a presence there, but you don't need to be doing some serious offering stuff or trying to, sell stuff there. You just want to be part of the conversation. It is your community. That's where your patients are. And if you're really interested in getting new patients, yes, you should be probably posting on a regular basis, like twice a week. And that can be overwhelming. What we usually do is let the person on the team that does some social media take responsibility for that. But they run out of what to post. They could use some help, and that help is available. And there's a difference in content. The major difference that Google recognizes is between user-generated content and brand-oriented content. Brand-oriented content is what you post yourself. You create, okay? But with social media, what Facebook, for instance, Meta is most interested in, and Google, is how many people are interacting with what you post. Are you posting intriguing questions that invite participation, or are you just trying to sell yourself? That's more valuable to Google. Google user content outweighs brand-generated content any day. And I promised you the patient compass. And so we end with this. A westbound patient has the care factor and not as much financial support or ability. But they're worth the investment because they care. So the focus here is you need to help them understand how you can make dentistry affordable, because they're loyal and they love you, and that's okay. An eastbound is someone who has the money, they just don't care. They don't have the value of dentistry that you do. That's a completely different animal. And then of course we have those who don't have the money and don't care, and I'm not suggesting that you should never serve this demographic. Don't get me wrong. You just need to be clear on what it looks like and what the potential ramifications are. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by giving you the history behind the 80-20 rule. But the 80-20 rule is something your team should know, because it helps you see your schedule in a way that you couldn't otherwise. Example, 80% of your revenue is coming from 20% of the patients in your schedule. And 80% of your referrals are coming from 20% of your patients. You ought to know who they are. It's just like a natural law of science. The 80-20 rule is important to understand, but let's apply it to this. I want to believe that at least 80% of your practice is heading north or west, and that less than 20% of your practice is going east or south, because these are the folks that create 80% of your headaches. This is why we build policy and procedures manuals, to protect ourselves from these individuals that are so abusive. I mean that in the way of the fact that they are generally pain-driven motivations. They are high maintenance. And Linda Miles, the other consultant, used to say, there's only two types of people in this world, givers and takers. And if you spend too much time with the takers, you'll have nothing else to give, ever. They can tend to be takers because they don't share your values in dentistry. In addition, they have a high cancellation rate. And yet, we feel so obligated to reappoint them again and again and again, as though they have this right to be reappointed when you know they're not going to come. But the front desk might feel obligated to reappoint them because she's trying to fill a schedule. And it's a continual loss unless you have a conversation with maybe both the patient and the front desk. And you can do that in a way without converting them to an object. You can see them as a person. I can say, Dr. Smith, we know how hard it's been for you to get here to your appointments. And so we're going to put you on what we call a short list, a short call list. And when we have an opening that's last minute, we're going to give you a call, and if you can take advantage of that, that'd be great. But if not, we won't burden you any further with these expectations to come to an appointment we know you really can't come to. Make sense? They can still come, but we continue to give them more time than they're willing to give in return. And what your team needs to understand more than anything is that without understanding this compass, we are tempted to spend less time with those who are worthy of our investment, worthy of our, what we call ROI. The return on our investment is with these folks. Don't let them rob you of that time. That's where your greatest payoff is in keeping your focus on those heading north and west. But sometimes we don't have this conversation with our staff. With southbound patients, they tend to be discount oriented. So be careful in your marketing. If you want to attract southbound patients that don't value and are generally, we've already discussed, emergency oriented, that's fine. Just know that when you extend a courtesy to a southbound, it will proliferate, it will grow because they refer people. We'll come back to that in a minute. And in addition, you're really talking about minimizing your risk with southbound individuals. You just don't want them to abuse you because you're going to try and treat them like you would anyone else. They're not anyone else. You just have to minimize your risk while still treating them as a person. I think it's the eastbound individual that I have had the most learning opportunity than any of the other designations, and I'll tell you why. Yes, it's hard to get them in the chair, but I think because it's a low priority, even though they have the money, and you don't always know this because looks are deceiving, I think there's a greater fear factor than I ever really considered. How does this relate to patient referrals? We hit on this very briefly. And that is, if a southbound sends you a referral because you were so sweet and over-accommodated them, what direction do you think they'll be heading? And if a northbound individual sends you a patient, which may be more difficult because they don't think you need any new patients, because, well, you're successful like they are, the chances of that referral will be heading north because they don't travel in the same direction. There's inherent limitations of relying on patient referrals is that you can't just turn it on like you can digital marketing. It's not the magic faucet. And it wasn't until digital marketing that actually became possible. And what about your team? What if your team understood this like you now understand it? Could you have a conversation about individuals that are abusing them in the schedule and they're tolerating maybe more than you even realize? Could there be patients that you may need to be informed of that need dismissing or need some conversation about how this isn't working for us? All of your team understanding this allows them to better position their greatest efforts with those who will give you the greatest return. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you again.